The rustle didn't come first, nor the tremor that usually announced their arrival. It started with the silence. It was a deep, resonant quiet that swallowed the usual hum of the geothermal vents and the perpetual howl of the wind across Pinnacle 7. We were used to noise, the constant companion of life perched 3,000 feet above the scarred earth. But this silence was a physical presence, a weight that pressed on your eardrums and made the hairs on your arms stand at attention. I was cleaning the magnetic filters on a condensation rig, my knuckles already raw from the cold, when the world just stopped. The silence came at 04:19 a.m., a time when only ghosts and maintenance techs like me were awake, and it felt like the planet had forgotten how to breathe. Below us, in the great, sprawling wound we called the chasm, the phosphorescent fungi that illuminated the abyss began to dim, their eerie green glow fading as if a celestial hand were slowly turning down a dial. People on the early shifts stumbled out onto the observation decks, their faces pale in the dying light, whispering questions the wind refused to answer. We called them geists, the things that had emerged from the chasm a generation ago after the core tap went wrong, shattering the continent and waking up a hell we never knew existed. They were geological nightmares, crystalline formations that moved with a predatory grace, turning organic matter into brittle, chiming statues with a single touch. But they were predictable. They hunted with sound, following the vibrations of our machinery, our heartbeats. This silence was new, a terrifying inversion of the rules we had learned to survive by. That's when the screaming started, not from below, but from within Pinnacle 7 itself, from the lowest residential tier, Sector Gamma. I dropped my wrench and ran, the magnetic soles of my boots clamping onto the grated metal walkway with each frantic step. The emergency klaxons never blared. The lockdown shutters never slammed shut. The system itself was as quiet as the world outside. The silence wasn't an absence of noise. It was a suppression, a weapon we hadn't known our enemy possessed. I saw Commander Eva Rostova near the central elevator, her face a mask of hardened disbelief, a plasma rifle held tight in her hands. She was a relic from the Unification War, a woman whose scowl could curdle milk, but I'd never seen the fear that now haunted the edges of her eyes. "What's the report?" I yelled, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the dead air. "There is no report, Elias." She clipped back, her gaze fixed on the elevator's descent indicator, which was stubbornly frozen on the gamma level. "Comms are dead. Everything's dead." We both knew what that meant. The Geists had never breached an area before. Our high-altitude fortresses were supposed to be untouchable, sanctuaries built on the principle that the creatures couldn't function beyond the chasm's unique atmospheric pressure. That principle had just been shattered. Men and women in civil defense armor started to gather, their faces a mixture of confusion and grim resolve. These weren't soldiers. They were engineers, hydroponic farmers, and geologist people who had sought refuge in the sky to escape the fight. But survival had a way of turning everyone into a soldier eventually. We were the descendants of the scientists and technicians from the original Cerberus project, the ill-fated Deep Earth energy program that had cracked the world open. We didn't have a standing army. We had protocols, contingencies buried in layers of bureaucracy and shame. Rostova turned to me, her metallic eye, a replacement from some long-forgotten conflict, whirring as it focused. "You were a digger on the Cerberus team, weren't you? Elias, you were down there when the first breach happened." She didn't say it as a question. It was an accusation, a reminder of a past I had spent 15 years trying to bury under maintenance logs and engine grease. That was a lifetime ago. I answered, my voice tight. I just fixed the plumbing now. The plumbing just broke, she retorted, gesturing toward a grim-faced adjutant who was trying to pry the elevator doors open with a crowbar. We have a protocol for this. A last resort. It's called resonance, and the council just activated it. They need you in the sublevels. They need your biometric clearance. My blood ran cold. Resonance wasn't a protocol. It was a ghost story, a bogeyman the founders used to scare new recruits. It was the darkest chapter of the Cerberus Project's fallout, a desperate measure taken in the early days when the Geists first swarmed out of the Earth's crust. They hadn't told us everything they were doing in those subterranean labs, but we heard the rumors, the whispers of what they were creating in the psych ward. They weren't building a weapon. They were weaponizing the human mind itself. They took telepaths, sensitives, people with latent psychic abilities, and amplified them, turning their consciousness into a broadcast signal of pure, unadulterated terror. They called them echoes. The idea was to create a psychic scream so potent it would shatter the crystalline consciousness of the Geists, driving them back. But it worked too well. The first and only echo they ever activated didn't just scream into the minds of the monsters. He screamed into the minds of everyone within a 50-mile radius. He drove his creators, his handlers, and 3,000 personnel insane before his own brain hemorrhaged. They locked the program down, buried it under layers of classified encryption, and swore it would never be spoken of again. Now, with the silence creeping up from the bowels of our city and screams echoing from Sector Gamma, they were unearthing that ghost. Why me? I demanded, my voice a low growl. My clearance was for geothermal surveying, not for that. Your clearance is Alpha Tier, Rostova said, her tone leaving no room for argument. It's one of the few that can bypass the system lockdown on the resonance chamber. Doctor, Eris Thorn is waiting for you. He's running the reactivation. Eris Thorn. The name hit me like a physical blow. He had been the lead neuroscientist on Cerberus, a man whose ambition was matched only by his complete lack of a moral compass. He saw people not as individuals, but as systems to be optimized, circuits to be rewired. If anyone would be willing to unleash an echo, it would be him. I followed Rostova toward a service lift, the small group of armed defenders parting before us. The silence was beginning to change, to evolve. A faint, high-frequency hum was starting to bleed into the air, a sound that felt like it was coming from inside my own skull. It was a dissonant, grating frequency that made my teeth ache and my vision swim at the edges. The Geists weren't just suppressing sound, they were replacing it with their own. They were terraforming our city, not with rock and crystal, but with sensory warfare. We descended into the mountain's core, the polished chrome and sterile white of the upper levels giving way to raw, hewn rock and thick, armored plating. This was the foundation of the Eyrie, the part of Pinnacle 7 that had been part of the original Cerberus facility. The air grew colder, smelling of ozone and damp stone. We passed cryogenic storage units, their frosted doors hinting at the genetic samples and forgotten experiments locked within. Finally, we reached a massive circular blast door, the words resonance chamber stenciled in faded red letters. A single man stood before it, his thin frame draped in a lab coat that seemed a size too big. Eris Thorn hadn't aged so much as he had desiccated, his skin pulled tight over his skull, his eyes holding a feverish, obsessive gleam. "Elias," he said, his voice a dry rustle. "I knew you'd come. Duty calls, even for the fallen." "I'm not here for duty. Aris," I shot back. "I'm here because she—" I jerked a thumb at Rostova. "Put a gun to the back of my principles." Thorn offered a skeletal smile. "Principles are a luxury for times of peace. We are currently in a state of existential threat. The entity that has breached our perimeter is a new morph, what we're calling a conductor. It doesn't just hunt with sound, it manipulates it. It creates zones of absolute silence, disabling our systems and disorienting our people, before directing the lesser Geists to the slaughter. Sector Gamma didn't fall to a brute force attack. It was surgically dismantled." He turned to a biometric panel next to the vault door. "We need to fight mind with mind. The original Echo project was a failure in execution, not in theory. The first subject was unstable, a blunt instrument. But we have another, Subject 2. She was designed for control, for focus, a scalpel to his sledgehammer." My stomach twisted into a knot. "Another one. You kept another person locked down here for 15 years. We kept humanity's last resort safe," Thorn corrected, his eyes glittering. "She has been in a medically induced coma, her mind dormant, but her potential intact. We need your clearance to open the chamber, and then we need a guide." My stare was cold enough to freeze fire. "A guide for what?" "The resonance array requires a sympathetic anchor, a human consciousness to help the echo focus its projection, to give the psychic energy a coherent target. The first subject broadcast indiscriminately. A wave of terror. Subject 2 can be aimed. Her file indicates she forms a strong empathetic bond. We need someone to go in there with her, to connect with her, and direct her rage at the conductor." He looked directly at me, and I saw the trap for what it was. "Your psychological profile from the Cerberus archives. You score exceptionally high on empathy, Elias. You feel things. Deeply. It's why you couldn't handle the aftermath of the core tap. Why you hid yourself away in maintenance. That flaw is now your greatest asset. It was a monstrous proposition, asking me to link my mind to a psychic weapon, to become the crosshairs for a creature born of nightmares. Before I could refuse, a voice crackled over Rostova's radio, the first sound to break through the interference. It was a scream, followed by garbled shouting. "Here breached Sector Beta. They're not crystalline. They're... oh God. They're flowing." The hum in my skull intensified, and with it came a feeling, an alien emotion that was not my own, a cold, curious, calculating hunger. The conductor wasn't just directing its drones, it was thinking, learning. It was inside our home. Thorn's expression was grim. "Every second we delay, it digs itself deeper into our city's foundations. Make your choice. Elias, will you hide in the dark and wait for the end? Or will you become the ghost that haunts our enemies?" I looked from Thorn's fanatical certainty to Rostova's desperate pragmatism, and then at the cold, unyielding steel of the vault door. Behind it was a person they had locked away since she was a child, a person they now intended to use as a weapon of mass destruction. And they wanted me to hold her hand while they pulled the trigger. The choice wasn't a choice at all. It was an execution, one way or another. I pressed my palm against the cold scanner. The panel glowed green, and with a hiss of ancient hydraulics, the locks on the resonance chamber began to retract. The air that escaped from within was cold, sterile, and carried the faint, tragic scent of lavender and regret. I was walking into a tomb. And I wasn't sure if I was meant to be the savior or the final sacrifice. As the heavy door groaned open, revealing a dark, circular room, the hum in my head coalesced into a single, piercing thought, a whisper from the encroaching Geist mind. "We see you," it seemed to say. "We have been waiting." And from the darkness of the chamber ahead, another thought, faint and fragile, brushed against my own. "I'm scared." I took a step inside, the door beginning to close behind me, sealing me in with the ghost they were about to wake. The interior of the resonance chamber was a paradox of clinical neglect. It was a perfect circle, perhaps 50 feet in diameter, and the walls were lined with dormant, dark gray panels that hummed with latent power. In the center, a single chair, more like a medical throne, was surrounded by a halo of delicate silver machinery that hung from the ceiling on articulated arms. It was a place designed for a single purpose, for a single occupant. Yet it felt less like a laboratory and more like a shrine to a forgotten god. The air, though sterile, still held that faint scent of lavender, and I realized with a sickening lurch that it wasn't a memory. It was being actively pumped into the room, a placating aroma for a prisoner who had never known a visitor. She was in the chair, and the sight of her stole the breath from my lungs. She wasn't a monster or a weapon. She was a woman, perhaps in her late 20s. Her form slender and pale beneath a simple white gown. A web of hair-thin wires was connected to a silver diadem on her brow, and an IV drip slowly fed nutrients into her arm. Her face was peaceful in its long slumber, her dark hair fanned out against the headrest. This was subject to the scalpel. This was the person they had kept in the dark for a decade and a half, waiting for the day they would need her to scream. A window, thick as my arm and polarized from the other side, shimmered into transparency, revealing Thorn and a handful of technicians in a control booth. Rossova stood behind them, a stony silhouette. Thorn's voice, tinny and disembodied, echoed from a speaker in the ceiling. "Approach the anchor interface. Elias, it's the console to the left of the chair. We need to establish a baseline connection before we initiate the waking sequence." I walked toward the console, my boots feeling unnervingly heavy. The soft telepathic whisper I'd heard earlier was gone, replaced by a profound sense of emptiness, a mind adrift in a dreamless sea. I felt like an intruder, a grave robber of the soul. I placed my hand on the console. It was cold and inert. "There are 2 contacts," Thorn instructed. "One for you, one for her. We're not establishing a full neural link yet, just a peripheral empathetic bridge. It will allow you to feel her emotional state and her to sense your presence. It is imperative you remain calm. Your anxiety will be like a poison to her waking mind." I took a deep breath, trying to push down the rage I felt toward the man behind the glass. I thought of something simple, something real, the feeling of the sun on my face from my childhood, before we lived in the shadow of the chasm, before the sky was a privilege. I held on to that feeling of warmth and light as I placed a small, gel-like sensor from the console onto my temple. Then, I turned to the sleeping woman. Her skin was cool to the touch as I gently affixed the second sensor to her temple. The moment it made contact, the world tilted on its axis. It wasn't a sound or a light. It was a feeling. A sudden and overwhelming plunge into a vast, silent ocean of consciousness. I was drowning in 15 years of nothingness, a sensory deprivation so absolute it was a physical agony. But beneath the silence, there were echoes of dreams, fragmented images of a life she'd never lived running through a field of impossible blue grass, the laughter of a mother she couldn't remember, the terror of a dark room and the prick of a needle. Her name, whispered in the currents of her subconscious, flowed into me, Kaylin. We have a connection. Thorn's voice cut through the haze, distant and irrelevant. Her theta waves are responding to your alpha patterns. She feels you. Elias. Keep her calm. Waking sequence initiated. A low hum filled the chamber, and the machines around Kaylin's chair began to glow with a soft, blue light. Her eyelids fluttered, her fingers twitched, and then her mind erupted. It was a tidal wave of pure, undiluted terror, the confusion of waking, the alien feeling of a body that hadn't moved in years, the sudden awareness of me, a stranger in her head. Her mental voice wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a shriek of raw panic that clawed at the inside of my skull. Who are you? Where am I? What's happening? I recoiled, stumbling back, my hand flying to my head as if to block her out. But the link was a part of me now. Her fear was my fear. I could feel her heart hammering in her chest, the cold sweat on her skin. Elia 9, anchor her now, Thorn commanded, his voice sharp with urgency. You're her only landmark in this storm. Talk to her, not out loud. In your head. Use the link. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing myself back into the storm of her mind. I didn't push. I didn't command. I offered. I sent her the image of the sun, the memory of warmth. I thought of my name, Elias, not as an introduction, but as a simple fact, a solid object in the swirling chaos. My name is Elias. You're safe. I am here with you. Her panic didn't vanish, but it faltered. A flicker of curiosity broke through the terror. Elias. Her mental voice was tentative, fragile like spun glass. Why? Why can I hear you before I could answer? Another presence intruded, cold and sharp and utterly alien. It was the conductor. It had felt her wake. The gentle hum in my skull was back, but now it was a predatory snarl. A vision flooded the link, a view from 1,000 different places in Pinnacle 7 at once. I saw through the eyes of the Geists. I saw the flowing crystalline horrors that had once been my neighbors in Sector Beta, their bodies elongated and fluid, pouring through ventilation shafts like quicksilver. I saw the Central Command Center, the technicians screaming as the very walls began to sprout jagged, chiming shards, and I felt the conductor's mind a geometric consciousness, ancient and patient, and filled with a chilling sense of purpose. It wasn't just killing us, it was harvesting us, studying our technology, our architecture, our fear. Its thoughts were not words, but complex equations of destruction. Kaylin screamed again, this time not from her own fear, but from the hideous clarity of the vision. The conductor's mind was a violation, a psychic poison that threatened to overwhelm her. The blue light in the chamber flickered and turned a blood red. It's located her. Thorn's voice was laced with a terrifying excitement. The conductor is focusing its energy on the chamber Elias. You have to direct her. She has to push back. Push back. She was a terrified woman who had been asleep since she was a girl. She didn't know how to fight. She barely knew how to be awake. But I could feel the conductor's psychic pressure building, a palpable force that made the room feel like it was shrinking. It was trying to shatter her mind before she could become a threat. I had to do something. I couldn't let it break her. I reached deeper into the link, past her fear, and touched the core of her power. It was a reservoir of immense, untapped energy, a sleeping volcano, but it was tied to her emotions, to her pain, to make her fight. I couldn't just give her an order. I had to give her a reason. I focused on the image of the flowing geists, on the faces of the people they were consuming, on the cold, dissecting intelligence of the conductor, and I wrapped it in my own rage, the 15 years of survivor's guilt from the first breach, the fury at Thorn for what he had done to her, the desperate, primal need to protect this fragile mind that was now inexplicably tied to mine. Kaylin, look, I projected, not just the images, but the feeling of violation. It's wrong. It's a predator in our home. It's hurting people. Feel it. Feel my anger. She felt it. And her own terror, cornered and with no way to flee, began to curdle into something else. Her fear became a weapon. Make it stop, she pleaded, her thought a thin, sharp razor of desperation. I don't know how, I sent back, my own mind straining under the pressure. But we'll do it together. Focus on my voice. Focus on the anger. Gather it up. And when I say now, let it go. The pressure from the conductor reached a crescendo. I could feel its consciousness trying to pry open our link, to sever our connection and devour Kaylin's mind. The red lights in the chamber pulsed violently. Alarms, real ones this time, began to shriek from the control booth. The chamber's integrity is failing, I heard Rostova shout. It was now or never. Now. Kaylin, I screamed into our shared mind. Push. She didn't scream with her voice. She screamed with her soul. A wave of pure psychic force erupted from the chamber, a silent, invisible shockwave that blew past the confines of the room and into the very bedrock of the mountain. It wasn't an unfocused blast of terror like the first echo. It was a focused lance of her fear and my rage, honed to a fine point and aimed directly at the alien consciousness of the conductor. Through the link, I felt our attack hit its mark. There was a moment of utter psychic silence, and then a shriek of pain that was not human, a sound like a glacier shattering. All across Pinnacle 7, every geist, from the mindless drones to the flowing horrors, frozen beasts, their inner light flickered and died, and then, with a discordant chime that echoed through the entire area, they shattered into millions of inert, harmless crystal fragments. The hum in my head vanished. The silence, the real silence of peace, returned. In the chamber, the emergency lights faded back to a soft blue. Kaylin slumped in the chair, her body trembling, a thin trickle of blood running from her nose. The link between us was still open, but it was frayed, exhausted. I could feel her immense relief, followed by a profound bone-deep weariness and a new, dawning horror at what she had just done. She had just annihilated thousands of living creatures with a single thought. I fell to my knees. The backlash of the psychic exertion hitting me like a physical blow. My head felt like it had been split open, and every nerve in my body was on fire. Thorn's voice came over the speaker, not with concern, but with triumphant, breathless awe. My God, it worked. The precision. It's beautiful. We have a weapon. We have a God. But as I looked at the trembling woman in the chair and felt the echo of her terrified sob in my own mind, I knew he was wrong. We hadn't created a God. We had just taught a ghost how to kill, and I had a chilling certainty that the conductor we had just wounded was not the only one of its kind. We had won a battle, but in doing so, We had just announced our presence to an entire legion of monsters, and they would be coming for the source of the scream. The aftermath of the scream was a deafening quiet, filled with unspoken terrors. The immediate threat was gone. The crystalline tide shattered into glittering dust that now coated the corridors of the lower sectors, a grim memorial to the fallen. But the victory felt hollow, temporary. In the resonance chamber, Kalen remained slumped in the chair, the psychic link between us now a fragile thread of shared exhaustion and creeping dread. The trickle of blood from her nose had stopped, but her mind was a whirlwind of confusion and self-revulsion. She was grappling with the incomprehensible reality of her own power, the fact that her first conscious act in 15 years had been one of mass destruction. I stumbled to my feet, my body aching as if I'd been trampled, and made my way to her side. I gently reached out and disconnected the sensor from her temple. The psychic link snapped, and the sudden solitude in my own head was both a relief and a profound loss. Her presence, her fear, her nascent strength, it had become a part of my own consciousness, and its absence left a void. Her eyes, a startlingly clear shade of blue, fluttered open and fixed on me. There was no accusation in them, only a deep, bottomless well of confusion. "Did I?" she whispered, her voice raspy from disuse. "Did I do that?" "We did," I corrected softly. "We pushed it back." The chamber door hissed open, and Thorn strode in, his face alight with a manic glee that turned my stomach. He was followed by 2 medical technicians pushing a gurney. He completely ignored me, his eyes fixed on Kalen as if she were a priceless artifact he'd just unearthed. Magnificent. Subject 2. The synaptic recoil was minimal and the projection focus was flawless. We'll have you debriefed and recalibrated within the hour. He spoke as if she were a machine, a tool to be serviced. Before the medics could reach her, I stepped between them and Thorn. "Her name is Kalen," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "And she's not a subject or a tool. She's a person, and you will treat her as one." Thorn's ecstatic expression curdled into one of annoyance. "Don't be sentimental, Elias. Your role as the sympathetic anchor is complete. This is now a military asset, and its handling is my jurisdiction." "She's not an it," I snarled, taking a step closer. The technicians hesitated, glancing nervously between us. "You kept her in a coma for half her life, and now you want to recalibrate her. She needs a doctor, not a programmer. She needs time to understand what just happened, what you made her do." Just then, Rostova appeared in the doorway, her plasma rifle held at a low ready. Her face was unreadable, but her metallic eye was fixed on Thorn. "He's right. Eris," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "The girl needs medical attention, not an interrogation. And you will refer to her by her name." Thorn looked from me to Rostova, his jaw tight with indignation. For a moment, I thought he would challenge her, but the cold, unwavering certainty in the commander's gaze made him reconsider. He gave a curt, dismissive wave. "Fine, see to her. But I want a full neurological and psychological workup on my desk by RO 800. We need to know her limits, her capabilities." The conductor was just a scout. The silence it projected was a precursor, a way to test our defenses. The real threat is still down there, and we need our weapon ready. He turned and swept out of the chamber, his technicians trailing in his wake like pilot fish. Rostova watched him go before turning her attention to Kalen, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. "Can you walk?" she asked. Kaelin nodded weakly, and with me supporting one side and Rostova the other, we helped her from the chair. Her legs were unsteady, atrophied from long disuse, but she was determined as we guided her out of the cold, sterile tomb that had been her entire world. She looked back at the empty chair with a shudder. "I don't want to go back in there," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Ever. You won't have to." I promised, a vow I had no idea how I would keep. Not if I can help it. We took her to the medical bay in the command sector, a place far removed from Thorne's labs. The doctors and nurses, their faces still etched with the shock of the attack, treated her with a gentle reverence, a quiet awe. She was the ghost who had saved them. While she was being examined, Rostova pulled me aside into her Spartan office, the large window behind her desk offering a panoramic, and now chillingly quiet, view of the chasm. "Thorne is a problem," she stated, getting straight to the point. "He sees Kaelin as the culmination of his life's work, a key to unlock powers we were never meant to possess. He will stop at nothing to control her." "So stop him," I said. "You're the commander." "It's not that simple," she countered, running a hand over her tired face. "The civilian council is terrified. We just survived an extinction-level event by a razor's edge. To them, Thorne isn't a monster. He's the man who just handed them the ultimate deterrent. They've already granted him full oversight of Project Echo. Legally, Kaelin is his property." My fist clenched. "That's obscene." "It's survival," Rostova sighed. "Or what they think survival looks like. But I agree with you. A weapon that thinks and feels for itself is not a weapon. It's a powder keg. And Thorne is holding the match." She looked at me, her gaze intense. "The link you formed with her, the empathetic bridge. Thorne's data shows it was unusually strong, almost a full psychic merger. He believes it's because of your past, your proximity to the initial core tap event. He thinks the energy release fundamentally altered your neural pathways." I thought back to the breach, the blinding white light, the sound that was not a sound. The doctors had told me I was lucky to have survived with just a few scars. Now I had to wonder what else had been left behind. "What are you saying?" I asked. "I'm saying," Rostova leaned forward, "that you might be the only person who can reach her, the only one who can keep her grounded. Thorne wants to isolate her, to mold her into a weapon that responds only to him. I need you to be her anchor. Elias. Not just during a fight, but always. Be her connection to the humanity he will try to strip away from her." It was a heavy burden, a responsibility I never asked for. But when I thought of the terror in Kaelin's mind, the sheer, crushing loneliness of her existence, I knew I had no choice. I had spent 15 years running from the ghosts of my past, hiding in the machinery of Pinnacle 7. Now, a living, breathing ghost needed me. I spent the next several days with Kaelin. At first, she was withdrawn, overwhelmed by a world of sensation she had only ever known through fragmented dreams. The taste of real food, the texture of a blanket, the sight of the phosphorescent clouds swirling in the chasm from her window. Each new experience was a miracle and a shock. She was incredibly intelligent, absorbing information with a startling speed, her mind making connections that were both brilliant and unnervingly alien. But her power was a constant, terrifying presence. A flash of anger would cause the lights in her room to flicker. A moment of sadness would cause the condensation on the window to freeze into intricate, mournful patterns. She was afraid of herself, afraid of the destructive force she now knew she contained. The psychic connection between us remained, no longer a forced link, but a quiet, background hum. I could feel her emotions as a subtle pressure in my own mind, and she could feel mine. I used that connection to help her, feeding her feelings of calm, of stability, of the simple warmth of the sun from my memories. I became her anchor, her tether to a world she was struggling to understand. Meanwhile, Thorn was not idle. He sent daily requests, then demands, for Kalen to be transferred to his research wing for essential monitoring. Rustava blocked him at every turn, using every ounce of her authority and a labyrinth of bureaucratic red tape to keep him at bay. But we both knew it was a temporary reprieve. The Council was growing impatient, and reports from our deep-range seismic sensors were becoming more and more alarming. The chasm was not quiet. The shattering of the conductor and its legion had not been an end. It had been a dinner bell. Something was stirring in the depths, something vast and ancient, woken by the psychic scream that had saved us. The Geists we had known were just the outermost layer, the scavengers. Now, we had the attention of the apex predators. The attack came a week later, without warning. It wasn't an infiltration of silence. It was a full frontal assault of raw, geological power. A colossal crystalline spire. A Geist larger than anything we had ever conceived of, erupted from the chasm floor, climbing thousands of feet in a matter of minutes. It was a living mountain of jagged, razor-sharp crystal that pulsed with a malevolent orange light. It didn't try to breach our walls. It slammed into the very foundation of Pinnacle 7, shaking the Aerie so violently that the entire structure groaned in protest. This was the conductor's master, or its replacement, and it wasn't testing our defenses. It was tearing our home out of the sky. Klaxons blared. People screamed. I was with Kalen in her room when it hit. We were thrown to the floor as the world tilted violently. Through the window, all we could see was the colossal or glowing form of the new Geist, its surface crawling with smaller, faster entities that leaped from its body and began to claw at our outer defenses. "They know I'm here," Kalen gasped, her eyes wide with terror. "It's calling to me. It wants me." I could feel it too, a psychic roar of pure hatred and hunger directed at her, a gravitational pull on her consciousness. Before I could stop it, the door to her room slid open. Thorn stood there, flanked by 4 heavily armed guards in black tactical gear. They weren't Aerie civil defense. They were his private army. "The time for coddling is over, Elias," Thorn said, a tranquilizer pistol in his hand. "The Council has invoked the Echo Mandate. She's coming with me." "Like hell she is," I snarled, placing myself in front of Kalen. The guards raised their rifles, but Kalen stepped out from behind me, her expression no longer fearful, but filled with a cold, hard resolve. "No," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I won't be your weapon, and I won't let this thing destroy my home." The lights in the corridor flickered and exploded in a shower of sparks. The guards' plasma rifles began to glow red-hot, forcing them to drop the weapons with cries of pain. Thorn stared, his arrogance momentarily replaced by shock, then fear. Kalen's eyes were glowing with a soft, blue light. She looked at me, and her voice entered my mind, clearer and more powerful than ever before. I need the chair. Elias. I need the amplifier. But this time, I'm the one in control. She was going to fight, not as a weapon, but as a defender. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that to fight a monster of this magnitude, she would have to unleash a part of herself that might consume her, and me, and all of us, completely. We were running back to the tomb, willingly this time, to let the ghost out of its cage. Our journey back to the resonance chamber was a desperate race through a dying city. The Eyrie, once a testament to humanity's resilience, was now a chaotic symphony of destruction. Emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows down corridors that shuddered and groaned under the relentless assault of the colossal Geist, which we were now calling the Titan. Sections of the outer hull had been breached, and the freezing, high-altitude wind screamed through the gashes, carrying with it the discordant, chiming song of the lesser Geists swarming the exterior. We ran. A strange and uneasy alliance me, Kalen, the furious and now disarmed Thorn, and a shell-shocked Rostova who was barking orders into her comms, trying to rally a defense that was crumbling by the second. Kalen was the eye of our storm. Her fear was still there, a cold knot I could feel in the back of my own mind, but it was now overlaid with a layer of steely determination. The power thrumming within her was a palpable aura, a low-level hum of psychic energy that made the air around us feel thick and electric. She was no longer just a girl who had been woken from a long sleep. She was becoming the entity Thorn had always envisioned, but on her own terms. The main conduits are collapsing, Rostova yelled over the roar of twisting metal. We have to get to the core shaft. It's the only way down that might still be stable. We reached the central axis of Pinnacle 7, a vast, open shaft that plunged thousands of feet down through the heart of the mountain. Emergency elevators were offline, but service ladders were built into the shaft wall. Below, we could see flashes of orange light and hear the sickening crunch of rock and metal as the Titan continued its assault on our foundations. The psychic roar of the beast was a constant pressure against my skull, a tidal wave of alien rage that was focused entirely on Kalen. It knew what she was, and it wanted to extinguish her. Thorn, his initial shock having given way to a frantic, obsessive urgency, was practically vibrating with a mixture of terror and excitement. The resonance array is our only chance, he babbled, his eyes wild. It can amplify her output 1,000-fold. She can shatter it, just like she did the conductor. Or it could shatter her, I shot back, helping Kalen begin the long descent down the ladder. This isn't some lab experiment. Eris. This thing is an order of magnitude larger than the conductor. We have no choice, he shrieked, scrambling after us. This is what she was built for. As we descended, Kalen reached out to me through our link, her thoughts sharp and clear despite the chaos. Elias, I can't just push it back. It's too strong, too big. It's not just a single entity. It's a legion. Its mind is vast, like a mountain range. She was right. The rage I felt from the Titan wasn't a singular emotion. It was the collective consciousness of countless Geists merged into one, a hive mind of geological fury. Attacking it with a single psychic blast would be like trying to stop an avalanche with a gunshot. Then we don't just push. I sent back, my mind racing as I climbed. We have to be smarter. Eris said you were a scalpel. Let's prove him right. We need to find its core, its heart, a weak point. How she asked, her mental voice laced with desperation as another tremor nearly shook us from the ladder. Its mind is a fortress. That's when an idea, born of my old life as a digger, a surveyor of the deep earth, struck me. Rustava, I yelled down to the commander at Odysseus, who was climbing just below me. The original Cerberus scans, the deep core resonance maps we made before the tap. Do they still exist? Rostova looked up, her face grim. They're in the central archive, but that sector was breached 20 minutes ago. It's a slaughterhouse. We have to get them, I insisted. The Titan is a geological entity. It must have a structural matrix, a core node where its consciousness is most focused. The old surveys might show us where that is. We can give Kalen a target, a flicker of understanding, then hope crossed Rostova's face. The archive is on sub-level 4. The resonance chamber is on 7. We can split up. I'll take a squad and fight my way to the data. You get her to the chair. Keep this channel open. She pointed to a small comm unit on my wrist. I'll transmit the coordinates the second I have them. We reached sub-level 4 and parted ways in a corridor flickering with dying emergency lights. Rostova and a small group of hardened defenders veered off into the darkness, their plasma fire soon echoing down the hall. My heart hammered in my chest as Thorn, Kalen, and I continued our descent. We were entrusting our only hope to a desperate battle miles away. The final stretch to the resonance chamber was a nightmare. The Titan's psychic roar grew more intense, and with it came hallucinations. Ghosts of the Ares dead whispering from the shadows, the walls seeming to bleed a dark, crystalline fluid. The beast was actively trying to break our minds. Kalen clung to me, her own power a defensive shield that kept the worst of the psychic assault at bay. But it was costing her. I could feel her strength waning. We finally stumbled through the blast door of the chamber, which was hanging crookedly on its hinges. The room was just as we had left it, a cold, silent stage for the terrifying drama about to unfold. Thorn immediately rushed to the master control panel, his fingers flying across the surface, bringing the dormant systems to life. "Powering the array," he announced, his voice tight. "The city's energy grid is failing, so I'm rerouting the primary geothermal tap. We'll have one shot at this." Kalen, one sustained, amplified broadcast. "If you can't neutralize it, the power drain will leave us completely defenseless." Kalen walked toward the chair, not with fear, but with the grim resignation of a soldier stepping onto the battlefield. She sat down, her small frame looking utterly lost amidst the complex machinery. I moved to her side, my hand resting on her shoulder. "I'm here," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Just like before." She gave me a small, grateful smile and then looked at Thorn. "Activate the link," she commanded, her voice ringing with an authority that made the scientist flinch. "And connect it to the city's comm system. I want everyone to hear this." Thorn hesitated. "That's not in the protocol. Do it." Kalen interrupted, her eyes beginning to glow with that now familiar blue light. "They deserve to know who is fighting for them." Reluctantly, Thorn complied. I affixed the sensors to our temples, and once again, the world dissolved as our minds merged. This time, the connection was instant, seamless. There was no terror, no confusion. We were two minds with a single purpose. Her vast power flowed into my consciousness, and my sense of tactical reality, my knowledge of the earth, flowed into hers. We were complete. The hum of the resonance array grew, the silver arms around the chair descending and bathing Kaylin in a column of intense blue energy. Her power, amplified and focused by the machine, felt like a star being born in my mind. Through our link, I could feel the entire city, the fear of the civilians huddled in the emergency shelters, the desperate courage of the defenders on the outer walls, and the fierce battle Rostova was waging in the archives. And then I felt the Titan. It was a consciousness of stone and fire and pressure, an ancient, alien intellect that had slumbered for millennia. It perceived our amplified presence as a challenge, an intolerable blight, and it focused its entire will upon our single point of consciousness. The psychic battle began not as a scream, but as a crushing weight, an attempt to obliterate our minds under the sheer gravity of its own existence. It showed us visions of our world crumbling to dust, of our sun dying, of a universe where life was nothing but a brief, meaningless flicker. It was a force of pure, geological nihilism. "Hold on," Kaylin, I projected, reinforcing our shared mind with every scrap of hope and defiance I possessed. "Don't listen to it. Remember the sun." Just as our mental shield began to crack, Rostova's voice, broken and panting, crackled over the comm. "Elias, Kaylin, we have it. The core. It's not in the main spire. It's in the base. A geothermal vent it's using as a power source, 3,000 feet below us. At the very bottom of the Ares Foundation, coordinates are transmitting now." A string of data flowed into the chamber's console. Thorne's eyes widened. That's directly beneath the primary geothermal tap I just rerouted, the one powering this room. I understood instantly. Our weapon and the Titan's heart were inextricably linked. To destroy one might mean destroying the other. But we had no choice. "Kaylin, did you get that?" I asked, channeling the coordinates, the image of the vent, into our shared mind. "I see it," she replied, her voice grim. "But to send a focused blast that deep, I'll have to channel all the array's power, all of the geothermal tap's energy, into a single, needle-thin beam. The backlash. It will destroy the chamber. It might overload the tap and shatter the entire foundation." "She's right," Thorne yelled, having followed our silent conversation through his monitors. "The feedback loop would be catastrophic. You'll bring the whole mountain down on top of us." "He's right, Elias," Kaylin said, a deep sadness in her thoughts. "This is a suicide mission." She was ready to sacrifice herself to save the city. But I wasn't. I looked at the geothermal tap monitor, at the insane amount of energy being funneled into the room, and I remembered my days as a digger. I knew how these systems worked. They had fail-safes, pressure releases, emergency shunts. No, I projected to her, my mind racing. Not a suicide mission, a controlled demolition. "Kaylin, I need you to do something impossible. Don't just fire a beam. I need you to shape the energy. We're going to use the geothermal tap not just as a power source, but as a weapon itself." My plan was desperate, insane, and had 1,000 ways it could fail. But as I looked into Kaylin's mind, I saw not fear, but a flicker of fierce, brilliant hope. We weren't going to die trying to push the monster back. We were going to pull it down into hell with us. "What are you talking about?" Thorne's voice was a frantic squeak from the control booth. "Shape the energy. That's not what the array was designed for. You'll create a resonance cascade that will vaporize everything within a mile. We're not using just the array. Ares." I shot back, my focus entirely on the link with Kaylin, feeding her the complex schematics of the Ares geothermal core that were etched into my memory. We're turning the entire mountain into a directed energy weapon. My plan was a piece of desperate, reckless engineering. The geothermal tap drew unimaginable energy from the planet's molten heart through a primary conduit of reinforced, heat-resistant alloy. The Titan had wrapped its base around this very point, drawing power and anchoring itself to the planet. Kaylin's psychic blast, if fired directly, would be a brute force attack. But if she could modulate her energy output, not into a beam, but into a sustained, high-frequency psychic vibration, a resonance, we could turn the geothermal conduit itself into a tuning fork. We could make it vibrate at a frequency that was harmless to our city, but catastrophically destructive to the Titan's crystalline structure. It was the ultimate application of her scalpel moniker, a piece of psychic surgery on a planetary scale. Kaylin, can you do it? I asked. My mind intertwined with hers. Can you hold a single, pure frequency and match it to the harmonic resonance of the conduit alloy? I could feel her probe the concept, her vast intellect wrapping around the physics with a speed that was breathtaking. The blue light of the resonance array intensified around her, the hum in the chamber rising in pitch to a piercing whine. I think so, she sent back, a tremor of exertion in her thoughts. But the energy required to sustain the vibration, it's immense. And I'll have to absorb the feedback directly. It will be like holding a star in my hands. You won't be holding it alone. I projected, pouring every ounce of my own focus, my own will, into our shared consciousness. I became a firewall in her mind, a bulwark against the Titan's psychic assault, allowing her to dedicate her entire being to the delicate, impossible task at hand. She's doing it, Thorn shrieked, staring at his monitors in disbelief. The energy output is stabilizing into a coherent sine wave. It's impossible. The entire chamber began to vibrate, a low, deep hum that resonated in my bones. It was working. Deep below us, 3,000 feet down in the bedrock, the primary conduit began to glow. First cherry red, then white hot. It was vibrating, singing a silent, deadly song that only the Titan could truly hear. Through our link, I felt the beast's reaction. Its roar of psychic hatred turned into a screech of confusion, then agony. The very foundations of its being were being shaken apart from the inside. It was like a symphony of shattering glass, a billion points of stress fracturing at once. The colossal spire began to shudder violently. Fissures of blinding white light raced across its orange, crystalline surface. It tried to detach itself from the mountain, to pull away from the source of its torment. But it was too late. Its connection to the geothermal vent had become its undoing. On the outer walls of Pinnacle 7, the defenders watched in stunned silence as the swarm of lesser geists froze, their inner light flickering erratically, and then simply disintegrated into dust, their hive mind severed from its source. The Titan let out one final, colossal psychic scream, not of rage, but of pure, unadulterated pain, and then, with a sound that was felt more than heard, it imploded. The massive spire collapsed in on itself, not into rubble, but into a waterfall of inert, sand-like particles that cascaded down into the chasm, leaving nothing behind but an echoing silence. In the resonance chamber, the backlash hit like a physical blow. The moment the Titan's consciousness winked out of existence, the energy it had been absorbing flooded back up the conduit. The array around Kaylin overloaded in a shower of brilliant white sparks. The machines exploded, the lights shattered, and the chamber was plunged into darkness and a sudden, ringing silence. The link between us snapped with the force of a thunderclap. I was thrown back against the wall, my mind a maelstrom of psychic static and the ghost image of a supernova. When my vision cleared, the emergency lights were flickering to life, casting a dim, red glow over a scene of utter devastation. The resonance array was a molten, twisted wreck. Thorn was slumped over his console in the control booth, knocked unconscious by the feedback. And Kaylin, she was still in the chair, her body limp, her head bowed. A wisp of smoke curled from the ruined silver diadem on her brow. I scrambled to her side, my heart a block of ice in my chest. "Kaylin," I whispered, my voice hoarse. I reached out and touched her cheek. It was cold. For a terrible, endless moment, I thought she was gone, burned out by the sheer power she had wielded. But then her eyelids fluttered open. The brilliant blue of her irises was gone, replaced by a soft, human hazel. She looked at me, a deep, soul-shaking weariness in her gaze. But she was there. She was alive. "Did we—" she began, her voice a fragile whisper. "We did," I said, a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled my knees, washing over me. "It's over." The days that followed were a blur of recovery and revelation. Pinnacle 7 was battered but unbroken. The cost in lives had been high, but we had survived. Rostova, who had made it out of the archives with only minor injuries, now led the council, her authority unquestioned. Thorn was stripped of his position and confined to quarters, his life's work a smoldering ruin, his living weapon now a person he could no longer control. Kaylin's recovery was slow. The psychic overload had permanently severed her connection to the immense, godlike power she had wielded. The constant hum of psychic energy, the ability to warp reality with a thought, was gone. She was no longer an echo. She was just Kaylin, and for the first time in her life, she was free. The quiet background link between us remained, a gentle, permanent bond of shared experience and empathy, a silent conversation that needed no words. We stood a month later on the highest observation deck, looking out over the chasm. The air was clean, the silence was peaceful, and for the first time since the core tap, it felt like hope. The phosphorescent fungi in the abyss below were beginning to glow again. No longer a sign of encroaching monsters, but simply a part of our world's strange, broken beauty. "They're still down there, aren't they?" Kaylin asked softly, her arm linked through mine. "The Geists." "Probably," I admitted. The Titan was a king, but every kingdom has survivors. But they're quiet now. Maybe they've learned that this little corner of the sky is more trouble than it's worth. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and I could feel a sense of peace from her that was more profound than any psychic scream. She was discovering the simple, quiet strengths of being human: resilience, compassion, the ability to find warmth in a cold world. We hadn't won by creating a bigger monster. We had won by reminding ourselves what we were fighting for. Not just survival, but for the right to live without fear, to be more than just weapons or protocols. The ghosts of the Cerberus Project, of the Echoes, of the long war against the chasm, would never truly leave us. But they no longer haunted us. They were a part of our story, a reminder that true power isn't about the ability to shatter mountains, but the courage to stand together on the edge of the abyss and refuse to be broken. The rustle didn't come first, nor the tremor. It started with the silence. But now, when the silence came, it was not a weapon or a warning. It was just peace, hard-won and precious, and in the quiet. For the first time, we could hear the sound of our own future beginning.